Warning: the following story contains themes of emotional distress and self-deletion. Viewer discretion is advised. A gentle breeze wafted about through the air, pulling with it the scent of fresh river water and potent pollen. The pine trees stood solemnly, resisting the gusts and adding their bark-like scent to the cacophony of forest smells. Above all else, a large waterfall rushed through the forest floor, splitting the forest in twain, creating a great big clearing where the water carved out the stone into a deep chasm down to the lake below. I sat next to this waterfall, as I have so many times, taking in the heavenly sights and breathing in the fresh autumn air. This moment was beautiful. I almost wished it to never end. Perhaps the last time I saw it. I woke up around 5:30 in the morning, a rather normal time for any teenager to wake up. My mother had already barged into my room as soon as she heard my obnoxious alarm clock sound off. She beckoned me to get out of bed, and I obeyed, practically falling out of bed as I arose from my sleepy stupor. Eventually, my consciousness came back to me, and I quickly dressed myself for the day. After a short moment, my mother returned and ushered me out of my room. I followed, out into the dining room, where she had prepared a simple egg, bacon, and waffles breakfast. Letting out a sigh, I took my place at the table. The food was warm, especially fresh. It seemed as if my mother had used the finest spices to make each bite fit for a king. Yet I found myself simply prodding the waffles halfway through, losing interest. My mother broke me out of my trance after some simple words of encouragement. "Come on, Robin. Isn't this your favorite?" she said as she took her seat. 2 empty seats still remained at the table. I spoke no words, but continued eating. Each bite let a sinking feeling into my soul, one after another, until no bites remained. I stood to clean off my plate, gathering myself to give a simple response. "Of course it is," I spoke softly, permitting a fragile smile upon my face. My footsteps echoed out loudly in the silence as I returned to my room to pack up my school items. After stuffing my backpack full, I drowned the jacket I wore in cheap cologne, then made my way to the front door, pack in hand. Me and my mother exchanged quick glances as I latched open the front door and swung it open. "Good luck in school today," she said with an enthusiastic grin. "Thanks. I'll need it," I muttered as I shut the door. The walk to my high school was rather lengthy, so I always started it early to arrive at school early. I didn't have much invested in hobbies, so I would simply distract myself with friends or schoolwork. The walk took me through a long forest path, which split into 2 paths. Usually I would only take the one which led to my high school across town, but occasionally I would take the other, either alone or with friends. This path led off deeper into the forest, into a clearing with a prominent waterfall, rightly named the Starfalls, due to the great view of the night sky you could receive there. A wonderful spot to hang out with friends, or ponder life's many questions solo. Of course, I had no time to visit such a place, so I took the path that led to school. A winding, twisting trail that eventually turned to sidewalk as I broke the tree line. The school was now in full view, and I made my way to the front doors. As I walked, I was greeted by various people who at least vaguely knew me. I gave each of them a quick smile and a friendly wave as I passed through. I pushed through the front doors and quickly made my way to the school library. My friends had been patiently awaiting my arrival, as they sat in the far corner of the library, talking away about whatever gossip was going around. As soon as they spotted me, they halted the conversation, and I saw as their eyes glowed and their smirks grew in my presence. Josh rushed over to me, while Violet and Jess followed after. After brief exchanges, we all quickly gathered back to the table and took our normal seats, and the stories began. Josh was like a brother to me, ever since the beginning of high school, and most of our memories consist of the dumb stunts we would pull. Eventually, he had fallen into a relationship, and naturally, she would become an instant addition to our friend circle, which is where Violet comes in. Jess was the newest addition to our little friend guild, brought in by Josh as a very trustworthy friend. Frankly, I had just assumed he was trying to set me up with her, but I pushed that premonition aside and welcomed her with open arms. The conversation suddenly fell upon me as I zoned out, and I spouted on about the various projects I had completed. I was rather proficient in most of my classes, so I always had some big project I would passionately discuss. Hey Robin, that's cool and all, but you always talk about that stuff. Don't you have anything else going on that you could talk about? Josh suddenly interrupted. The question stunned me as I began to rack my brain, vainly attempting to think of anything remotely interesting outside of my school and social life. Alas, there was nothing. The others sensed the tension that had just been created, and they backed off the question, continuing on with the gossip. I retreated, slowly fading out of the conversation and losing myself within my own machinations. My thoughts were pervasive, agonizing, and I contemplated the various avenues of life itself. You still with us? Jess said, breaching into my thoughts. Yeah, I responded shamefully. Well, why wouldn't I be? Me and Jess held eye contact for a moment, and I felt the eyes of the rest of the group fall upon me. The dreaded pressure almost broke me as my face went flush. The gazes were suddenly thrown everywhere around. Then the group began to laugh, attempting to evade the awkward situation. I soon joined in, escaping the judgment cast upon me. The bell rang, exactly 5 minutes from 7. The four of us stood and exchanged goodbyes, while a sarcastic joy supported all of our emotions. I broke off from the group, ready to start my boring, mundane school day. While I may describe school to be a terrible experience, in truth, it was a great way to pass the time, to escape from the thoughts of nothingness. The days always passed quickly anyway, both a blessing and a curse. They say time flies when you're having fun, but I can barely call this fun. Before I knew it, I was walking out of my final class just a few moments before the dismissal bell rang out. Thinking back, I could barely remember the past few hours, aside from the brief awkwardness in the morning. That moment stuck with me, replaying in my head like a broken record, shadowing over my normal, mundane thoughts. It became another addition to a long list of unfortunate memories, an infectious playlist that rarely reared its ugly head. It's about time I revisit it. My thoughts were luckily interrupted as I stepped out of the front doors of the school, and I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned around to see Jess, retreating her hand as if to imply it was someone else who tapped my shoulder. Of course, I easily saw through this ruse and initiated a conversation with her. What's going on, Jess? I asked her, presenting my typical weak smile. Oh, nothing. I was just wondering if you'd like to meet me at the Starfalls. She responded softly, hiding her face. The proposition confused me, as it just seemed outlandish to me at the time. Obviously, a part of me knew why she'd asked such a thing, but my entire being rejected that thought, like a plague. The silence persisted, and it almost seemed like Jess was ready to give up the question, when I suddenly responded. Sure. Why not? I spoke reluctantly. Jess's eyes lit up like Christmas lights, and she stood taller and more confident than before. She grabbed my hand and led me down the sidewalk in a light jaunt. Eventually, we reached the tree line. She broke off from me, sprinting into the woods. Catch me if you can, Jess yelled out, her words slowly fading as she disappeared into the forest. I snickered, still in awe of what had just unfolded. After I had gathered my thoughts, I began down the trail after her. I knew my destination, but not the cause, and this weight carried itself with each step upon the rough dirt. An eerie blue haze blanketed the forest, although this strangeness felt rather serene. The birds were louder than ever, chirping their beautiful songs to the wind, while the pleasant smell of lavender filled the air. The forest was unnaturally natural, providing me the most raw, unbridled experience of nature. I felt my heart pound harder in my chest as I approached the fork in the trail. I had half a mind to just head home and forget about this whole situation, but my feet refused to walk in that direction. My attention was strictly focused on the other trail, the one that led to the Starfalls. The same graceful scene continued on this path, and it seemed to be the only path I had the will to walk down. So I did. The trail was more overgrown than I had remembered it to be, twisting and turning in every which direction. The birds only grew louder and more cheerful as I continued, and I let my hand out to find a small bird taking perch on my wrist. A little brown robin. Almost symbolic. A robin on robin. The trail came to a clearing, and the robin finally flew off, disturbing my frail thoughts. I looked out to see the trees, tall and ancient, circled around a large waterfall, fed by a calm river. It was the Starfalls, and it looked more enchanting than ever. I glanced around the area to find Jess standing nearby, near the edge of the waterfall, looking out to the lake below. Gentle rays of golden light cast themselves around Jess, portraying a natural spotlight upon her. Her soft brunette hair danced about in the small gusts of wind. I stood in awe of the beautiful scene, calm yet confused. These past few moments almost felt like a dream. My thoughts were once again cut off, this time by sensing a presence behind me. I turned back quickly to catch a faint shadow escaping my sight. I turned back to Jess to see she was now staring at me, with a beauty similar to moonlight emanating from her eyes. "I knew you'd make it," Jess called out, beckoning me to her. Seemingly in a trance, I stepped forward, against my will or any decision I wanted to make. I listened as each leaf crumbled under my steps, as each twig snapped by my approach. The magical forest only grew brighter and more vibrant as I got closer to this metaphorical apotheosis. I took a harder look at Jess as I got closer, noticing every feature, every beautiful detail about her. She was seemingly perfect. Of course I'd make it. Can't refuse coming to this part of the woods. I spoke more adamantly than usual. I love this place. It's a great place to escape from reality, Jess responded. A moment of silence stood before us, as I finally reached the waterfall, and stood no more than mere inches away from Jess. I felt as her breath slowly caressed my face and neck, as we looked down into the glowing abyss. I felt as our hands slowly clasped together, while we stood next to the rippling crystal water. The wind gusted once more, a soothing whistle echoing over us. The sky thickened, the blue haze swirling with the green aura of the forest, creating a mesmerizing cyan fog. "I'm so glad you came," Jess whispered into my ear. I couldn't think of a more perfect moment. I couldn't respond. My eyes were fixated in one spot, Jess's face, and her starstruck eyes. The warmth in her hand emanated into my cold one, providing me a shallow comfort I had not known before in my life. Eventually, Jess turned to face me once again, and she giggled. Her face was practically glowing with joy and radiance, and we then turned to face each other, hands interlocked. Jess leaned forward, and I mimicked the movement. The air began to glow brighter as the wind swirled the fog, similar to the swirling of the shining lake. The birds silenced themselves for the moment, providing a brief respite from the sounds of the forest, exaggerating the moment tenfold. A moment of beautiful intimacy. The vile intimacy. It disgusted me. I pulled away, loosening the grip of our hands, cutting myself off from the artificial warmth. Jess gasped in shock, surprised by my sudden rejection. I watched as the shimmer in her eyes darkened to a dull and black void. The world around me began to shift as the tone of the scene changed. The cyan haze slowly turned to a painful, vacant gray, while the songbirds began to chatter aggressively, creating an unbearable cacophony that drowned the grim thoughts now filling my mind. My heartstrings tightened, making the simple task of breathing now nearly impossible. I turned away, but not before catching a single tear fall from her right eye. I can't, I muttered, no emotion blighting my response. The peace had been shattered. False smoke filled my lungs. Each breath felt as if the weight of the world had been placed upon my chest, crushing me as I gasped for air. I glanced around to see the truth of the forest, barren and suffocated. The beautiful songbirds were now replaced by the hideous caw of many crows. The trees, while still clearly alive and leafy, looked drained and broken. Roots sprawled out in each direction upon the forest floor, creeping about the topsoil as they suffocated the ground of whatever life it might have contained. I began to run. "No! Wait!" Jess yelled out in desperation. I ignored her plea, breaking into a full-out sprint. I charged down the beaten path, deafened by each violent snap made by the brittle twigs. The shame boiled over as I ran, and my emotions finally revealed themselves, in the form of heavy tears and harsh scratching. I choked on the tears as I ran, only adding to the pain of merely existing. A bitter wind tore its way through the woods, complementing the now dreary forest. The gray sky slowly turned to slight reddish as the guilt only grew. The run was excruciating, yet short-lived, as I made it to my house without realizing it. I wiped the tears from my face and walked in, to predictably find no one was home. I threw my backpack near the dining table and checked the calendar. Saturday was approaching. I was bound to be cut off from the world, left to fester in my own thoughts. Oh, so terrible thoughts. I walked over to the bathroom, slowly creaking the door open and flicking on the flickering dim light. The mirror beckoned me, producing a thin film of darkness around the room, and so I approached it. The sink obviously sat beneath the mirror, and I turned on the water, splashing it across my face. I looked up, into the mirror, to see my face, disheveled and torn, but otherwise normal. My broken eyes were stained with watery tears, my retinas fractured, leaking the very void forth from them. A dark tendril then took form in the mirror, creeping out from the shower's edge and slowly encroaching upon my reflection. Another appeared from the door, slithering away towards the other me. One by one, several more revealed themselves, moving through the mirror until they reached me, at least the visage of me, a true display of my humanity. The mirror began to change, with a strange glitching effect, distorting my image. An ominous glow slowly creeped out from the edges of the back wall, a deep and angry red, pulsing out to shadow my reflection. My reflection looked up, revealing a sinister grin. I was taken aback by this disturbing image, and I backed away from the mirror. The reflection didn't copy me, as if it took on a life of its own. Its eyes resembled black pearls, jagged cuts formed across its face, and red stains flowed from its eyes. The being stared at me with a piercing glare that froze me in place. I held my breath as long as I could, but eventually the need for air got the best of me, and I gasped. The entity then spoke. "You're pathetic," the entity rasped, in a corrupted rendition of my voice. I couldn't respond. "Why would anyone care about you? You're a coward," the entity croaked. Still, no words came to me. The words resonated deeply within me, contorting some of my sorrow to malice. "Oh, you gonna cry?" the entity mocked. The judgment only grew my anger, and with that, the entity's as well. "No one's gonna save you. I'll drag you into the fiery depths where you belong," it screeched. The room quaked, knocking over bottles and kicking up year-old dust. The red glow grew deeper, more angry, while the darkness slowly creeped closer to us. "You think you have a chance with her? You're wrong. You can't even help yourself," it screeched. My vision began to distort, Mirages of multiple figures started to fade in and out of existence. I winced in agony as the voices only screamed louder and more cohesive. Gripping my head, our wrath began to boil. "You can't ignore me. You know I'm right," it screeched violently. I began shaking with fear and anger. The voices in my head created an ungodly cacophony, which drilled into my skull like painful screws. The lights began to flicker, forcing my eyes shut in a disorienting haze. "You'd be better off dead," I screamed. I balled my fist and drove it into the mirror, shattering it. The glistening shards danced about in the air as they fell to the ground. The sudden surge of pain forced me to reel my hand back, to find various serrated cuts across every surface, blood dripping in viscous droplets down from each slice and onto the tile floor. A stinging pain surged up through my entire arm as I grasped my bloody hand, wincing in a vain attempt to hide the agony. Without thinking, I pulled a nearby hanging towel and quickly wrapped up my shredded hand, and it quickly soaked with dark crimson blood. The sun began to set beyond the horizon, creeping out of view from the bathroom window, while the bathroom light slowly flickered back to normal. The dim light buzzed arrogantly, invading my head with hopeless thoughts. I hung my head over the sink for a moment, then slowly raised it to meet the fractured mirror. Few jagged pieces were stubborn enough to stick within the frame, showing my broken expression 1,000 times over. Once I had been fed up with this grisly sight, I stepped out of the bathroom and slipped into my room. In fact, there was nothing left for me to do today, except rest. Tomorrow would be a new day. I woke up at exactly 5:15 in the morning, the final sign I needed, 15 minutes before I'd normally awaken. I threw my cover off to find I was still wearing the same clothes as the day before, and there was now a bloody handprint pressed into my sheet. My hand pulsed with a warm and inviting pain, as if my soul was begging for more, a notion I could hardly resist. The sun still sat below the horizon line, which kept my room coated in a veil of shadows. My eyes were adjusted to the darkness, and I could clearly see the image of my room, scattered and distraught. My mind was in the same haze as before, with the events of the night prior looping in vengeful memory as I stepped out of my room. The door made a loud creak as I swung it open, which made me afraid my mother would awaken to see the mess I had made. Luckily, I heard no stir inside her room and continued on my way, mindlessly walking to the front door. A black void creeped in from the crevasses, beckoning me closer and closer to my predicted fate. I grabbed the doorknob and swung it open, revealing the void that had previously terrified me. Today, I stared the void right in its face. An unnatural frigid air cut through the air as I made my way through the darkness. I walked the path I've walked so many times before, yet never committed to. This time would be different, however. This time, I had nothing holding me back, as even my own humanity had finally left me. I was numb to the agony, ignorant of suffering and hope. It was as if I had fallen through the earth, an exile to the world. I rejected the world, so it rejected me. My conscience kicked back in as soon as I reached the forest path, as a bleak wall of feverish trees barred my path. Eventually, I spotted the trail and continued down it, my legs moving as if on autopilot. I nearly tripped on each rock and twig on the trail as the darkness prevailed, shrouding my mind with similar dark thoughts. Memories replayed in my head like a broken record, while the good memories were simply pitiful to conjure, as they wouldn't affect my decision. I reached the crossroads, and without a second thought, I was pacing down the overgrown trail, the trail that had led to one of the most peaceful places left, at least to all the others. This place was now soaked in terrible memories of the passless life I led. Now, this place was simply a means to an end, a place with no meaning, only the meaning we give it. The clearing came into view, while the dark veil began lifting, with the shadows of the trees lurking over the deeper parts of the forest. The sun was now rising up from the horizon, signaling the start of a new dawn. I looked deeply into the fiery red ball, and with it, seeing my reflection once again. Black eyes stared deeply into mine, contorting my thoughts further into the ugly and beautiful void, as if I were to become one with it. I was here, the fountain of destiny, the Starfalls. Its beauty encapsulated me once again, if not for a different reason. The water was just as clear as ever, shimmering out beautiful rays of light across its surface. This water cascaded over the edge, just the same as before, while the trees stood stoic, providing safety to the clearing. I approached the edge and took a seat, staring down into the lake below. My legs were swung out, dangling over the cliff. I threw a few rocks and stared endlessly at the lake, in a vain attempt to judge the distance. It was rather far. I estimated it to be about 100 feet down. I began to sense a presence behind me, so I turned back to see nothing but forest. No birds sang songs for me to revel in. No smells accompanied me in the lone woods. No one was coming to save me. To appease whatever dark force was taking audience, I stood back up and turned to face the forest. I knew someone or something was watching me, so I had to put on a show. The cliff was now behind me, the sun overshadowing me. I extended out my arms, as if I were attending my own crucifixion. Hatred is a powerful weapon, and I knew this more than anyone, for I had used it against myself my entire life. Then, I let myself fall backwards. "No! Robin!" A familiar feminine voice called out. It was too late. I was already plunging downward, opposite of the Holy Kingdom. Time slowed as I watched the top of the cliff grow further and further away, awaiting the dreadful impact I knew was soon to come. The rushing waterfall fell right beside me, and it almost seemed still and unmoving. Rays of light shifted around me, creating columns that refracted the world around me. Then, I hit the water. My breath was knocked out of me immediately, and I gasped heavily for air, but I was only met with the weight of water filling my lungs. The weight forced me deeper into the crystal water, as my limbs slowly went numb. I tried to flail about, but it was a fruitless endeavor, and so I let myself go still. Struggling to keep my eyes open as I ran out of oxygen, I began to start seeing a vibrant purple light, deep and endless. This light soon consumed my entire vision, warping the lake until it was unrecognizable. Weightlessness overtook me, and my chest remained constrained. I was drowning, but I simply wasn't losing consciousness. The water wrapped around me like a cold blanket as I plunged deeper into the void-like abyss. Sealed like stone, my fate was apparent, a self-chosen one. I had given up. Yet the world had not given up on me. The light only grew brighter, removing the darkness of the depths with the soothing film of the shallows. The violet water glistened in the artificial light, and I watched as each bubble floated past my lifeless eyes. I still couldn't breathe, yet I didn't need to. I was purely an entity in the water, a raw faucet of life's energy. The light began to pulsate, then words echoed out into the void and reached my ears. "This is not your time, Robin," the voice gurgled. Sparkling lights filled the shimmering water, reminding me of beautiful little stars. It was as if I was staring straight into the cosmos. Instead of an endless void of nothingness, I saw true beauty in its most pure form. I saw hope in the open space, ready to have endless freedom. I saw faith as I looked into the blinding lights, with the warmth of meaning. Finally, I saw the truth. "Go now, my child. The world still needs of you." The voice spoke one last time. I suddenly lurched forward, sitting up in a bed. Gasping for air, my lungs were finally met with tasteful breaths of sterile oxygen. My eyes slowly adjusted to the dim room, while an obnoxious and eerie beeping blared out in the background. I quickly glanced around and observed my surroundings, to find I was in a hospital room, stuck to a comfortable bed. Continuing my search, I found two figures accompanying me in the room. My mother sat across the room with her head hung low, and the other person, it was a girl, head against my legs, quietly sobbing. It was Jess.